Well, thank you everybody for joining. Appreciate it. This is going to be a fun endeavor. This class is governance, risk, compliance, affectionately acronym of GRC. Growing, and I think it's fun and interesting, and you get your hands into a lot of things in this GRC world. So hope to go through it all and explore it all. So yeah, meet your instructor. This is me. Hi, I'm Greg. Says Gregory there. You can call me Greg. I'm currently with Salesforce in GRC. Been there 7.5 years, and even prior to that, I was with Robert Half doing GRC internal to their organization. And then prior to that, my GRC experience is probably about 12 years total. And then prior to that, I did a lot of IT audit and auditing. And I'll get into that later in the course. But I think one of the forays or entry points into all GRC things is an IT audit career, which I think is a great way to get into security and security GRC. My overall niche is security risk, so the R in GRC, and I we'll dive deep into that further on in the course, and I think that's a fun place to be overall, because you get your hands into a lot of different things, and it never gets old or never gets boring. Hobbies include, I just started coaching my daughter, my 7-year-old daughter, in soccer. I coached her second season now. Season just wrapped up, and so that's new to me. I did not play much soccer growing up. I played other sports, but not soccer, and so coaching soccer has been rewarding and challenging and fun to learn. I also play a lot of guitar. I have guitars you can see in the background there. Bike riding, with my kids, and with my road bike when I want to go faster. I also attend a lot of tech conferences here in San Francisco. I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area. I live in Walnut Creek, just outside San Francisco, and it's a great place to live and work, because there's constantly tech conferences and new vendors spinning up new security tooling and so forth, where I get to attend a lot of conferences. So I was at a conference yesterday put on by the Gartner Group that is for CISOs in the Bay Area, and always insightful. So that's me. We'll move on here. The overall agenda of the whole course I currently have, and I think it's going to be fluid, because I think, depending on the students' needs and questions, I may update or change this some. But currently the course is set up to be 6 weeks long. Week one, this first week, is just going to be a GRC overview and how it fits into the overall organizations. So that's what we'll cover today. Week two, I'll dive deeper into the governance, the G pillar, so to speak, of GRC, and I'll start to cover, I think, the R pillar of GRC. That's what I've been practicing the last few years mostly. Is to me, that's the most fun. So, and I think it's could be the biggest and most convoluted and complex. So I have that sort of broken up into 2 different weeks. Start the deep dive into the risk in week two, and then I will finish the deep dive into the risk pillar on week three. And then also week three, I will start into the compliance pillar, and that also may overlap into week four. And then week four also, some compliance practices like a common control framework is something I want to dive deep into and run through a couple examples. I think that's a key concept and a key skill for everybody to have if you're getting into GRC, is to how to do a common control framework. And then I have week five to be the sort of the future of GRC, with some tooling and AI tools and the new security tooling that's out now. And then at week six, I'll get into a deep background of auditing. It's kind of an extension onto compliance, but I think it's key. I am a CPA, and my role is as a CPA, when I was in that more traditional CPA role, was to do IT audit for financial statements and financial audits of large companies. So I worked for Arthur Andersen at first, and I worked for Deloitte and Touche, also doing IT audits for publicly traded companies. And I think that audit background, like I said, is a good foray into all GRC and security. So that's I think I'm dedicating a whole week to that. And also, as I said, this may update as we go and as we determine the needs of different students and questions and feedback. Any questions for now? Moving on to week one agenda. So this week one agenda, like I mentioned before briefly, it's just a GRC overview. So I'm going to touch on the basics of all the different functions within GRC, and including some that don't even have their own letters in the acronym GRC. But I think these are all important, and what I've seen in my experience within GRC at a large software as a service company here. Also want to talk a bit about GRC interfaces and how these different things and functions interact with each other and interact with the rest of the organization, both inside of IT and outside of IT. And then we're going to have some fun sort of case studies and debates towards the end. So the chicken and egg debate and a case study. And finally, some buzzword jeopardy. I think overall in the security industry, knowing the lingo and knowing buzzwords and kind of understanding the background is one of the things that will get you far in all your phases of your career. So we could play some buzzword jeopardy. That's probably going to be an evolving section of a lot of my courses over the next few weeks. So to start in, oh yeah, what to expect overall, a little deeper dive on what to expect. I do have 6 weeks of courses set up. They're 2-hour sessions. The step one is to understand and explain the roles and responsibilities in key GRC functions and teams. Also team member tactics and team member duties. I also want to talk a little about the different skill sets team members might need to have and develop, and then describe the interfaces and information flow amongst the GRC and the rest of the organization. That's what I meant with the GRC interface discussion. There's a data flow and information flow and communication and coordination and stakeholder situations being built amongst different pillars of GRC that are critical, and I think it's important to synchronize and coordinate with all those different stakeholders to have a successful GRC program. And then overall, this is also probably won't happen in today's course, but a deep dive into each pillar of the GRC, the governance, risk, and compliance. And I'll have some examples and walkthroughs and challenges. And I think it was week 4 or 5 on my last slide where I get into GRC tooling. We'll get into the different tools that are on the market. I may even get a brief sample or walkthrough or a free student account to see if that's something worthwhile if the students want to engage in a little bit of a hands-on challenge or hands-on initiation or entree into some GRC tools. And then the last one, as an extension into the compliance part, like I mentioned before, I want to look into a whole class where I just the basics of auditing. So um, yeah, I was an accounting major in undergrad and in my master's and bachelor's are both accounting, and auditing is one of the key components. It's one of the 4 main sections of the audit of the CPA exam. At least when I took it, auditing was like a whole 1/4 of the whole CPA exam process. And a lot of audit standards have been changed and updated in the last 25 years since I went through the CPA exam process and got certified. But I think a look into the basics of auditing will get we'll get all the students far in their career to understand and where to go next in a GRC career. So here we are, week 1, governance, risk, compliance, title slide. So overall, what is the GRC framework? Just to put it in very summary overview form, it's a part of an IT organization or part of any organization, usually a part of an information technology overall governance of a company, but it really is to align and steer IT and IT support into meeting business objectives. So I want to stress that. You'll probably hear me repeat that a lot, that it's tying IT organization to overall company-wide or organization-wide business and objectives and goals. So nonprofits and government entities as well should have some functions that manage and steer and guide IT operations and production and all the things that go into supporting the business. But I think the key aspect, at least in my experience in the public sector, I mean the private sector, is that all the it's a meeting the needs of the business is the key critical component here. And so, like I mentioned, GRC fits in an IT organization. Usually, where I see GRC is under a chief information security officer, and sometimes under a chief engineering officer. And there are pros and cons to having both such formats and such org structures. But yeah, some other terminologies we'll get to in security GRC overall terminology will be next as well. So the key GRC organization business mission is the governance is the policy and standard setting body in the organization within IT. And the risk is to assess the risk pillar is to assess the posture and measure the cross sections of threat, vulnerabilities, likelihood, impact. All those are things, the unsaid words there are the things that impact the actual business. And the compliance is to prepare for regulatory and industry standards in the form of control and control documentation. Again, that's all to support the actual overall business of the overall organization and not just an IT organization. So, I want to stress in the key point down there that GSC functions and all the support, they have to tie to, the underlying sentence that I didn't write in each individual pillar is they all have to tie to a mission of an organization that you're supporting. So, the governance standards that you set have to be appropriate for the type of business you're in and appropriate for the regulations you have to fit in and appropriate for the size and structure of your organization. The same with security risks in the R pillar. They have to just meet the business needs. And part of that risk pillar is to determine what the business needs actually are and then move on to assessing the risk. So even deeper look into governance. Like I mentioned, the governance group within the GRC writes physical documentation and standards and policies and publishes them. So the way I usually see them structured is, simple. You think of a Word document that becomes a PDF document, or Confluence, if you're getting, more fancy and more mature, a Confluence page, or a set of standards and guidelines that all teams have to meet, and they should really tie to the mission of the organization, like I said. So if you think about an acceptable use policy that an HR department might have you sign when you first start with a company or any organization, your governance sets those and works with HR or employee success types of organizations to align IT types of policies and standards to the organization. So if I look at something as simple as like a password policy, on changing your passwords and keeping your passwords, strong, that is something that is set at has to be set at a governance level, and it should tie and flow down from or be a double click on the standard set by an HR department of the organization, which is something the governance department should work on. The governance pillar of GRC should be working on with HR. Under risk, the further deep dive look into risk is you determine the formulas through formula-driven assessments, data analysis, and stakeholder engagement, the priorities of an IT and security department to meet the mission, culture, strategy of an organization. So some academic buzzwords there, but I think to summarize risk is that a risk is anything bad that can happen to the organization, and I'll dive deep into that later in the risk side. But you're really focused on, to me, in security, the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of your organization and of your organization's data. So you as a risk professional in the R pillar have to determine the key data elements, the key systems, the key IT tech stacks and products that are necessary to protect and risk assess and have security over, and then align your risk strategies to those. And in compliance, the key item there is to determine what industry you're in and what industry standard frameworks from a regulatory perspective are needed to determine what kind of controls you need, how strong those controls need to be, how long they need to be tested, how far they need to be tested, how if you need a SOC 2, because that's all you need. If you're a brand new startup, you might just start with a SOC 2. If you're trying to sell any kind of products in Europe, there's a whole different set of standards. Um, there's South Korea has their own some independent individual standards and frameworks they have to meet, and Japan and Australia have separate ones too. So if you think about the geographic locations you want to do business in and try to sell services or software to, um, it's kind of the compliances framework and job to determine what frameworks need to be in place. Um, and then all the compliance sounds like a regulatory thing, but I will say this for compliance, it is a revenue generator. So you as an open, if you're opening your own business and trying to sell some enterprise software or whatever you're trying to sell to whomever enterprises, you're not getting very far without getting some simple basic SOC 2 compliance or ISO 27001 compliance in place. So I will say that for all its bad press that it might get about being a checklist and being a regulatory thing and being sort of a burden and having to go through a compliance framework, it's revenue generating. So you as a salesperson or your sales departments at your organizations, will pound down your door to get a SOC 2 report if you internally if you want to open up sales and open up revenue pipelines to customers. So um, any questions on the overview? And I'm going to dive deeper into these in the next few slides as well. Okay. So I think GRC has a lot of other aspects to it as well that aren't really covered in the acronym. So there's some three additional slides. So the three slides on top, or three boxes on top, are the G, the R, the C that I've covered in the last slide. There are other things in GRC that GRC departments tend to do. And so one is, bottom left, issue management. Anytime an exception happens, so say your group has your department has a situation where they bought a system and it is not in compliant with or your standard policies that you set forth. Maybe there's no way for an admin password to be reset in a strong enough manner that meets your standard policies. That's what we call an issue. It's not meeting your expectations. It's not meeting the expectations set forth from the governance. So the governance sets a standard and a policy, and a group can't meet it. That becomes an issue that should be tracked and monitored and accepted and reviewed. Another example is any type of audit happens, and if you're auditing a change control process or software development lifecycle, you gather a population of changes that get moved to production, and you test for review and you test for whether that code was tested and reviewed and approved before it moved to production, and say one or two of them didn't have the appropriate amount of approval before they get moved to production. So you have an audit issue. That becomes an issue, and an issue that should be tracked in an issue exception management program and process. And I think that's often overlooked and duplicated, and sometimes people think a risk is the same thing as an issue. To me, and some companies do conduct business that way, but to me, a risk and the risk pillar of GRC is different than issue management. So issue management is more actual problems that have happened that you know about, and you have to track them and tie mitigation to them and work them to a situation where you won't have that issue again, or that department can get in compliance with your standards, or with an audit issue of like I mentioned in my example of an audit issue of code getting moved to production without proper testing and approval. At that point, you have to work with those teams to develop a better set of controls so that that can't happen again. That's the process of issue management. And again, that should be tracked at a bare minimum, like a spreadsheet type of thing. A more advanced GRC should have a whole GRC tooling program around that, and not just a spreadsheet, but I've seen it tracked in both places. And I think it's very different than a risk register. The sales cycle too. I mentioned that the compliance is a driver for revenue, and it is, but also the sales cycle inside of sales. So when you're selling a software to any enterprise, that enterprise wants to have a questionnaire about their security posture answered, and a GRC common task is to say, what's our security posture, and interface with the sales group to fill out a request for information to make sure we can meet the needs of any potential customer. So that is another thing that's kind of I've done that many times. Fill out these little questionnaires. Banks are heavy on these. Banks have these RFIs that are very formal, and once you fill one out, you can kind of sometimes rinse and repeat and copy them to other banks, but they have very formal RFI processes and standard questionnaires to fill out. The the annoying thing is, yes, they're sometimes boring questionnaires you fill out. The fun thing is you're tied to a sales cycle. You're helping your company make profit. So there's things that I think could be looked down upon as boring rudimentary work, but they are also helping your sales team make some sale, make some revenue, and generate revenue for your company. So to me, they're exciting to work on and fun to work on. I always enjoyed getting them done. Not doing them themselves might be more tedious, but getting them completed was always fun, and passing them over. And then the final on the bottom right, GRC is often seen as and often is the spokesperson for overall security. and security posture, and presents to the chief information security officer often, and the overall security posture and audit efficacy, and how we've resulted and how the audit results have come up, can be often asked for boards of directors and senior executives and C-suite level management. And these are a key, really important task is to present those in a way that the board of directors and the C-suite like to see it in like an executive summary fashion, with some double clicking available. So when a C-suite member wants to double click and look into further and get more detail about a specific item, they can do so. But I'm a big fan of dashboards that are diveable, so to speak. So you look at one particular item in a reporting executive summary dashboard, double click on it, and get a little bit more information. I've reported to CISOs before who never wanted to see my executive summary. They went straight to the details, and that's cool, a little scary, but it's fun. So I think that the whole board reporting aspect of GRC is an important unknown or unaccounted for in the acronym of GRC. Any questions before we keep going? So I'll dig into the interfaces and flow, because they're like any good 7-year-old soccer team that I coach, you don't want to be playing bunch ball. That's what I tell my soccer kids. Bunch ball is when, like, a bunch of kids just sit together in one little pack and they sort of run around with the ball. We want them to spread out and play position. So GRC is interfaces with each other in various ways, and these interfaces are important to have a coordinated effort overall. So I'll start with the top left, and governance flows. The governance group is a standard setting policy. There should be a prioritization of the standards needed, and the ability to meet those standards feeds into risk overall, and it feeds back from risk as well. But the standards should not be met just to feed issues exceptions management, but standards that they're not able to be met do feed IEM, issues exceptions management. So if you set a policy or a standard so strong that departments just make it too cumbersome to fill that or meet that policy, like say you require 5 approvals and reviews before any code gets moved to production, or you require a full pen test with zero issues before it gets moved to production. A fast moving organization that's trying to develop products may circumvent those controls, or may simply not meet those controls or meet those policies, and then you're going to have a bunch of things in your issues exceptions management program, and you'll have a sort of revolt on your hands. So there has to be a balance on your risk tolerance and your amount of compliance controls and your cost benefit of the controls you're willing to input. So that's where governance has to work with risk and issues and stakeholders and engineering departments on how they push code and how efficient they need to be. So that's compliance. On the risk side, so risk is near and dear to my heart. I've spent many years in it. Risk should be setting the standards and helping governance set the standards in terms of which standards need to be made first. So if you're not in an organization that is developing your own systems and developing your own software, you're not pushing your own code, then maybe that whole SDLC example that I brought up isn't all that relevant to you. Then that may not be a standard you need at all. It may be all third-party purchased tools or managed service providers purchased tools, but that's really the output of a risk department to determine what levels of risk you're willing to accept, what levels of risks are right for the organization, and what your tech stack looks like, what products you're making, and what business you're in, and then push that to governance. Risk is also important to determine which types of compliance frameworks you need to be met. Risk itself is a compliance task sometime. I think in ISO, there's the ISO framework on ISO 27001. There are the ISMS of, I think there's 2 different sections in the intro section, 6.4 and 4 dot something, where you're required to do a risk assessment and have a risk framework and identify your risk. So it's a compliance thing in and of itself, but it also should drive the compliance you need. So we're talking about, like, if you're if you want to do business in a certain aspect of or certain geographic location or a certain type of industry, your risk group should be the ones assessing what type of compliance frameworks you need to get. And then same thing. Overall compliance does tell risk levels that feed into the overall risk formula. So the overall risk formula we'll get into a little more deeply later, but controls are a function of the overall risk formula. So risk formula being the impact and likelihood of a threat scenario or a threat actor doing something bad with your environment, is you subtract from that the overall level of your overall strength of your controls. So if controls are very strong, even though the risk is high, inherent risk is high, your residual risk is low, and there's an inverse relationship there, and that's compliance feeds back and forth to risk that way. Um, and then compliance also feeds into governance through control strength tolerance. If there was a move in one area where it worked, where we wanted to move from passwords to passphrases, so passwords being have to be 20 characters long. And so the balance is, okay, if we have to do 20 characters long, but we still have to change them every 3 months, that's kind of cumbersome on users, and it makes the help desk go crazy because people have to reset their passwords because they can't remember them all the time. That gets to be tough. So tough on compliance. So compliance can feed into governance and say, well, in that case, in that scenario a few years ago, a passphrase was used, but we only had to change passphrases once a year. Made it a little more manageable to have a stronger set of stronger set of controls on the password, but a longer time frame you had to use it. And then on the bottom left on issues exceptions, if the issues exceptions management log of all the things that are going wrong is getting way too large and way too unmanageable, it's probably because departments aren't following your standards and policies, and that might be because your standards and policies might be set too high for them. So some things need to change there. You need to either relax the standards and policies, or if the standards and policies are lax enough, but there's just departments not meeting them, some other mitigations need to be put in place. Controls should all have a cost benefit to them. So this is just the overview of how they interface and flow, and I'm going to walk through some examples in the next probably not this session, next few sessions on some examples, and we'll see how we can all interface with each other. And overall, my key message is that all this needs to really interface with your objectives of the mission and the mission of your organization, whether it be a public sector business or a private sector department of a government or a nonprofit type of organization. You have different needs and different standards that you need to implement. So that being said, I'm going to move on unless there's other questions. At some point, if no one asks any questions, I'm going to start calling on people. Maybe. So this is a fun topic I want to do. This is conversational. So please come off mute if you want to participate here. The chicken and egg debate. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? In GRC, let's talk about this. If you're a brand new startup, and what GRC functions come first? I mean, there's an argument for what should come first. So put a 1, 2, and a 3, and your argument on why governance should come first. We can sort of fill those out individually. So does anybody have input on what comes first, the G, the R, the C? There's going to be awkward silence unless someone comes off mute.
The G.
All right. I think it's good. I think there's no right or wrong here. I think it depends on your organization. But one argument for the G is probably that you have to set the standards before you do anything else. If you don't have standards and policies in place, everybody's doing whatever they want, and trying to set standards after everybody starts doing whatever they want is a little more cumbersome. So that is a standard good way to do it. So I think the two arguments for the G is what I said, but that was Houston that said that, right? Do you have any other arguments for why? Any other arguments for why G would come first?
Yeah, it's pretty much what you said. The governance is going to be set the tone for everything. I mean, I guess risk could come first. I don't know. It's it's tough.
It's good debate when you think about it more. Yeah, it's tough to think about. Well, one argument for the R. They may have an argument for the R. To come first.
Yeah, your risk can really set like how your governance is going to be if you have a lot of risk depending on what you're doing.
Yeah. Exactly. That would be my argument too. Is like if you're in a SaaS startup that's going to have a lot of customer data on your environment, you have to tell you know your risk assessment and your risk threshold would be a little lower. You're going to accept a lower risk, so that means your governance and standards that you set might need to be stronger. And so that and you know that's one argument for maybe risk coming first. Um, in an academic, and there's also the debate on this. This could be in an academic sense here, sitting talking about it with everybody in a group. You might answer one way, but in the real world, people might have to do things a different way, just the way things work out. Um, and then I'll also bring up a good argument for C, the compliance and all. I mentioned before, compliance is revenue facing. So you as a SaaS company, if you're a brand new startup making some new thing, you are not selling anything to anybody unless you get a SOC 2 report or an ISO. So from a real world perspective, I often do see compliance actually does come first, even though I think none of us creating goals and standards for businesses. Yeah, I think it's not academically right to say compliance should come first from just a general sense of what should be done. But in a real world, I think compliance tends to come first a little bit more because they can that's how you start selling your product. To me, I would say yeah, the R really should come first. What you're doing, and sometimes a company may not call it a risk assessment, but you assessing what you need for your organization in terms of what standards and what policies you need to write and what goals, that is in and of itself a risk assessment. So it may not be called a risk assessment, you may not document as a formal risk assessment, but that is you know risk assessment that you know, the output of that is what standards and policies you're going to write in your governance pillar.
And just to piggyback on that, I would say that another word for risk would be threat modeling. It's evaluating the same thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I have that's part of my deeper dive. Yeah, you're getting into
My
it. Yeah.
bad. I'm going back on mute.
No, it's good. All good stuff we'll get into. I'll wait till Jasmine's done typing. I see bubbles flashing. Yeah, I mean, I think there's no right or wrong answer, and I think the academic way you say things should be done may not always just I'd go with risk should go first. Yeah, it may not always be the way we think logically it should flow, because I do think you know at a senior level organization, say you're a CEO of a company, and like I mentioned before, you're trying to get your first sale, you're trying to get a proof of concept into a couple of enterprises and start making some revenue and start getting your product out there. The first thing that really has to be done to get that is your SOC 2 compliance. But that being said, your SOC 2 compliance, you, you it's going to be hard to get a SOC 2 a clean SOC 2 report without some standards and policies. So that's part of the debate as well. So okay, thanks for participating in my funny little chicken egg debate thing. Next, I have another discussion point. We talked about SaaS a little bit, like a software as a service, in my last example. But in this case, maybe we'll just go with like a medical device company. So say you have a new, let's AI is all the rage. Let's talk about AI. So you have a new product that can attach and have some AI uh, an AI analysis of logs and metrics and monitoring that comes out of a medical device implanted like a pacemaker in a heart. It's a new product, and so what are this new product? What are the key things you would need to do first with that product? And again, no wrong answers here necessarily. So I'll go ahead and start and say like that's going to have to be HIPAA compliant for one right off the bat, right? We all know that it's any kind of functioning with it's going to have protected health information. It's going to have identifiable patient information. It's going to have to be HIPAA compliant no matter what before you get off the ground running, no matter for anything. So say the AI product in that case, compliance has to go first for that new product. Um, you know, but in and of itself, what we just did in thinking about that new medical devices, we did a little mini risk assessment to say, well, the risk assessment of the risk of patient protected health information getting out and the fines that we know assigned to that are big enough that could put a startup out of business. That compliance would have to go first. So what we just did in thinking about that is kind of a little mini risk assessment, but the real thing is that I think in that case compliance or HIPAA compliance has to come first. And then what about for a new geographic expansion? Say you're wanting to start to sell to, you have a customer who has huge operations in Japan, and you need to stand up an instance of your product over there, or an instance of your tech stack in Japan. You might have to get ISMAP first. ISMAP is the Japanese, one of the Japanese compliance initiatives. Another question or topic of conversation is if you have an overall compliance issue. I brought up the other one related to the maybe two of a sample of 25 pushes to production didn't go through a proper review and approval per an audit, so you have a compliance issue. So say your SOC 2 now has a compliance issue on it. What's the first thing that has to happen? I mean, you've published, we've published at Salesforce, we have published SOC 2 reports that do have audit issues on them. Not for our main product, more for our acquisitions and smaller side products that we'd bought in. But I mean, it does happen. So just as a broad overview, what kind of thing, the first couple things that need to happen. It goes into that issues exceptions management program. We'd have to tie some mitigations to it and potentially, rework and reconfigure certain control mechanisms so that, a push to production can't even happen without an approval. So, some kind of preventive control that just prevents it from happening altogether. Is that's what the first thing that needs to happen. And you can do that. There are some certain controls inside of, and workflow can be built inside of source code repositories to prevent controls, but those types of controls are configurable. So it gets to be a situation where you can configure them. You could an auditor has to really determine whether they were configured properly during the whole period of the audit. Okay, so any other comments on my case studies here?
I think this was actually good. I just want to put in my 2 cents because even in my 6 years, no one's ever made me think about, what comes first, G, the R, or the C. Like, who says that? I don't know. That was a good one. I just wanted to point that out. But I did want to give people the opportunity to think of real world scenarios that they can relate to. And I do want to get some more class participation to encourage people to think. So typically, from a business owner standpoint, and when you're thinking about coming up with a product, right? Typically, you're just thinking of the product. You're not thinking about, compliance or risk to begin with. You're thinking about the requirements for that product. But then can anyone tell me after that, which I've already said it, so everybody should be raising their hands. Can anybody tell me what happens after you come up with the requirements? About to start calling on folks. Jasmine, go ahead. Please tell me you're coming off mute. If I got to go to the chat and read what you are typing, oh my God.
Yeah, I think that's a good takeaway for maybe next time as I evolve my slides to add some class participation questions like, hey, you are all assigned.
Modeling?
Yes. Okay, good. Yeah, so great, Shannon. So yes, it is a threat modeling. So let's think about the Kyora IQ mobile app, right? Because when I was thinking about the app, that's the first thing that I thought about was the requirements and then the threat modeling. So can anybody tell me the risk that are involved with creating a mobile app, right? Especially think in particular about Kyora IQ and some of the risks that would have come with developing the mobile application.
Obviously hacking.
Hacking of the mobile app. But what type of information would, and you've signed up, so what type of
Credit card
information do you think?
information.
Boom,
First of all.
yes. And do you know what standard that aligns with?
Compliance.
It's
I'm sorry.
compliance, but what framework?
Governance.
Okay, so those are so governance, risk, compliance, right? That is just the, how do you put it, Mr. Melville?
Those are the departments and the pillars within IT. I think where you're going is the payment card industry standard, the PCI.
So you just
Yeah,
don't tell them the
PCI,
answers.
yeah.
You just don't
sorry.
tell them the answer.
Oh, sorry. Am I too easy of a...
Thank you for telling the answer.
That's it. So I think that's a good takeaway for me to add a slide or adjust my slide to have some more participation and have people coming up with their own scenarios or questions.
No, it's no worries, right? This is our first class and I want it to be interactive. I want people to think about what framework standards are actually out there and kind of apply it to real world scenarios. So I really didn't even think about it until you actually showed the slides here. So it's really good conversation. So got it. We got PCI, right? So what is the other standard do you guys think, or another framework that I would have had to also consider when developing the application, right? Think about our infrastructure. And for some of you guys who have been in other classes, what is another big framework that I would have had to make sure that I am adhering to when it comes to building of the mobile app and the infrastructure?
NIST?
Houston, you cannot participate anymore. Just okay, so yes, definitely this 853. And then Mr. Melville said this framework because right now that you have a mobile application and you have to worry about hacking, what is the framework that Mr. Melville already had referenced earlier that we also have to adhere to and why?
SOC 2.
Yes, and why? Do you know what the SOC 2 framework is?
Yeah, but it's left my brain.
Okay, no worries. So it ensures that our monitoring, our security operations center is adhering to a framework in which we can actually identify active threats, right? So of course, if we're going to be worried about hacking, we want to have our SIM tools installed. So yes, that's a good conversation. Thank you, Shannon, for participating. Just want to make you guys think a little bit outside the box. Okay, Mr. Melville, I'll give it back to you. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a good conversation. I should so I'll make a note to update a slide or two and go through some of those in a little more depth. I will go through in the compliance deep dives. I'll go through the different compliance frameworks and their needs and their assessments and that's also a good conversation for the CCF conversation too. So last few minutes here, we actually have about 12 minutes left. We'll do some buzzword Jeopardy. Here's my little image about the old school Jeopardy TV. Where the remote control was your dad telling you to go change it. Maybe I should have done this different. Okay, so I think I'll make this slide a little fancier at some point, but some overall just key definitions. I wanted the slide to not show the answers right away. But buzzword, shift left. Does anybody know what that means without looking at the slide? And give me an example of shifting left. I mean, it's generally shifting from a detective control to a preventive control. Is the underlying policy, the underlying mindset is you want to prevent errors and omissions and prevent rework from having to get conducted as opposed to detecting and then itemize it. So in the context of a software development lifecycle, a scanning and assessing code prior to it moving to production for SQL injection threats or cross-site scripting threats, or making sure inputs are validated in all codes or all variables you define in your code. If that's all scanned for and reviewed for prior to moving to production, you've then in the move to production process, that code gets scanned and reviewed before it gets applied to prod. You've eliminated or minimized those types of nasty things getting into your production code base. So it's synonymous with the whole difference of controls where preventive, detective, and corrective controls exist. Staying on the theme of APT, the common APT groups are attacker and hacking groups that are long-term strategic hacking services and activities that happen in a nefarious way. There's these groups out there. Scattered Spider is the one. Oh, I actually wrote that one in there too. They are the one behind some latest ones. They're persistent and constantly hacking away at things and slowly gathering a little bit of information on their target. So they're that's why they call them the advanced persistent threats, where they commonly um, build a case and build a file on some attack target of theirs. And then bottom left is CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, availability. You'll hear these words over and over again in all things in security, and we could dive a little deeper into it. But confidentiality is just getting the right access to the right people. So it's authorization. It's saying that, okay, if you're an administrator of a system, you probably have more access than a standard first line of defense users. Or if you're, a first line help desk operator, you probably shouldn't have access to reset the admin password. That might have to go to a second line, or it's just the right access to the right people. And in a banking or financial services sector example, certain people higher level in the organization might have access to more funds movements and approval authority of a little bit more of funds, and have access to data that's at a higher level as opposed to sort of the frontline teller. So there's authorization and role-based access approvals. That's confidentiality, and you also want to keep unauthorized users away from man-in-the-middle types of attacks. Integrity is the second one. That's just the accuracy of your resources and data. Having somebody as a man-in-the-middle just manipulate data that moves back and forth, and just so the accuracy is there is the integrity part. That's the key aspect of the CIA triad. And then availability is underrated, and people don't really look at it as a security threat, but a ransomware attack is an availability attack. I mean, you're just bringing down resources. Sometimes an attacker group might simply want to cause malicious problems and not even steal data, just cause outages. And so that's what a distributed denial of service attack is. It's just causing an outage for for the purposes of destroying stuff. And these could be unintentional as well. That whole CrowdStrike thing that happened a few years ago, about a year and a half ago, it took down a lot of servers, took down some airlines. It was an availability attack. It was a mistake. It wasn't really an attack. It was an availability issue. And people don't look at that as a hack or as a security issue, but availability is part of the security triad. So I look at those as security issues. So in that case of CrowdStrike, I mean, I think CrowdStrike got a bad rap for it, but I think some of these airlines are using some antiquated systems, and there's probably some fault on both parties there. You're not testing your patches properly if you're the airline, and CrowdStrike probably also should have been internally making sure and tested their patches that they're releasing were going to be okay to put on all their customers' PCs. If they didn't want a customer to be running some version of whatever software operating system they're running, they should have made that their definition. But that's sort of an availability issue, and that can be an accidental thing or an intentional. Again, so compliance frameworks, we talked about some of those just a minute ago, but a set of control objectives in order to address a certain risks. SOX is Sarbanes-Oxley. You'll commonly see it referred to as SOX. So people say SOC and SOX interchangeably sometimes, and sometimes it's key to say SOX with the X, or SOX or SOC with a 2. SOX is a financial internal controls over financial reporting. That is the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. It's the outcome of Arthur Andersen and Enron. That's the piece of legislation that went in place after Enron went down. Is new internal controls over financial reporting requirements are there for large publicly traded companies. Actually, any publicly traded company. If they're not large, you get an exception to delay a few years, but all publicly traded companies have to comply with SOX. Also, Microsoft's fault is the EDR too much control of this. Yes. That could be a whole case study in one of our classes. And then SOC 2 is AICPA's framework. It's the standard set of control. SOC 2 has been around for a long time. It used to be called SAS 70. It's an auditing standard for auditing service organizations. PCI is payment card industry. And HIPAA is, healthcare mainly created the HIPAA standard, has a lot of different elements to it, but the element we talk about in terms of IT security and compliance is the HIPAA requirements over protected health information and patient identifiable information. And high trust is a fairly well, I guess I shouldn't say new anymore. It's not that new anymore, but it's created at a private um, uh, combination of a couple different companies, and it kind of combines PCI and HIPAA, in my opinion. And we'll dive deeper into those over the course of this next few sections of this class. And the next two of the buzzwords, compliance baseline. This is sort of a governance thing inside of GRC. We see this as, we'll set the standard in almost in a policy level and say all systems have to comply with SOC 2. So all the controls that are relevant to us inside of a SOC 2 in our organization have to comply with uh, all the different systems being built and products being built and products being purchased have to apply SOC 2 types of controls to them. So and same for SOCs. That's like the minimum. So we can say as a guideline or as a standard, our minimum baseline will be to make sure all of our products are in compliance with SOC 2 and SOCs, and that's the governance standard to set. And it depends on your organization too. In some organizations, you might not care if you're, some side uh, non-important, non-customer facing, or some system that doesn't hold customer data. You may say it doesn't need to have SOC 2 compliance, or you might not be ready for that yet. But that's a setting that you have to assess the risk on and set your governance standard accordingly. And then something we'll get into later on in the course too is common controls. So these are wide-ranging controls that apply to many different compliance baselines. And a simple example is if you're developing any sort of application, all code should be reviewed and tested prior to moving to production. So no one should be able to move code directly to prod, by themselves. That's a standard control. And every single framework, SOX, SOC 2, ISO, PCI, they all have a version of that control, maybe worded slightly different. It's as simple as passwords. Every single compliance framework has the same or some version of you need to have passwords on for all systems, period. And so the access controls, unique accounts have to be in place at all. You can't be sharing accounts. That's my example down there. And passwords, every single compliance framework talks about a password. So what you want to do is create a common control framework that says, here's my control. All systems have passwords. All passwords have to be X, Y, Z, and then that control, if you're slick about it, you test it once for all frameworks, and then that part of the control is just simply covered and tested once, and you meet that part of each compliance framework, like just kind of by one test. So the beauty of, and all senior management and C-suite level people love the idea of the common control framework. And if you build out a framework to meet all compliance frameworks, you will win the love of your C-suite for sure, because they don't want to have to test for all the different SOCs, SOC 2, PCI, HIPAA. They don't want to test password controls 5 times. They'd like to test it once, and you save a lot of time and be more efficient that way. Any questions on those? I'll actually leave it there for a minute, because the next 2 slides we're right at time right now. Next 2 slides are just thank you and wrap up slides. But there's my Kyora IQ email, and yeah, I see these as like an evolving set of slides that will grow, and I'll have some more prompts for student engagement in the future. But email me with questions in the off time, and we'll dive deeper next time. And the next hour, I guess, is just a question and answer session.
Yep. I was just going to say that. And we have a hand up, Kanku.
Yes. Thank you so much for this. But I was going to say, is there a framework that you think that we should master, or should we just know a little bit of all of them?
That's a great question. I mean, if you want, depending on where you are in your career, if you're brand new in your career, the jobs that are out there are I wouldn't, and I mean, this is debatable, this is in my opinion, as if you learn SOC 2, that's the baseline. to me. That's the first one everybody kind of gets, and there could be some healthy debate on whether that one's the best or that one's the worst. But in my experience, SOC 2 is the most prevalent.
Mhm.
But I'm also coming from a situation where here in the Bay Area, all startups, they all get their SOC 2 first because they're trying to sell enterprise software, trying to sell to enterprises, not to end users. So if you're looking at a business that's selling to end user consumers, PCI might be more important. But I would say, in my opinion, SOC 2 is kind of the first standard. It's kind of one of the older ones. It's antiquated too. It's not even that. I'll be honest, I don't even think it's that good. I think you can have a lot of security flaws and get a clean SOC 2 report. But that being said, that's the baseline, and that's probably where the most jobs are.
Mm. Okay, so why SOC 2 and not SOC 1?
Okay, so SOC 1 is the same thing as SOC 2, but more for financial control. So SOC 2 is more for IT security control. So
Oh, okay.
my conversation was on SOC 2. I shouldn't use those interchangeably. SOC 1 is the same thing, but for like insurance companies that have a managed service provider for an insurance company, that the financial side of the controls would be SOC 1. And that's not to be confused with SOC 2 type 1 and type 2. So I should talk about that.
Okay.
There's a type 1 and type 2. So SOC 1 is, like I said, the financial controls, and SOC 2 is the cybersecurity, more security operations center or software IT controls. SOC 1 type 1 and SOC 1 type 2, or SOC 1 type 1. That's a point in time control. So what you always want is if you're buying a software, you're evaluating something, you want a SOC 2 type 2. So type 1 is a point in time. So they did a snapshot test. You often would get a SOC 2 type 1 if you're just starting out, and so you just want your point in time. That means that an auditor came in, and for that day, they got a sample of one control, and they saw that it was working, and they went away, and just that one day. It might not be a day, it might be but it's a snapshot point in time. SOC type 2 SOC 2 type 2 is over the course of a period of time, and usually it's 6 months at least, and it's better if it's a year. But so that 6 months means they would have sampled and tested controls that were in place over the course of that whole 6 months. And so they should have processes in place to audit and identify controls and audit and test controls, so that you get assurance that all those controls are in place for the full period of the audit. So SOC 2 type 2 is stronger than SOC 2 type 1, and in practice you'll only see a SOC 2 type 1 if someone's just brand new and the first time getting a SOC.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
I should also talk about, we didn't talk, so internationally, ISO 27001 is like, it's more recognized internationally, and to me it's actually my favorite because it's like pliable, and what you do in a SOC in an ISO 27001. I got to be a lead implementer of ISO 27001 in my last role. You assess the organization. It's heavily based on the risk part, so the R pillar. So you assess what your company needs, and you assess how strong your controls need to be, and you implement those controls, and then you test those controls. And it doesn't matter if you have a failure, as long as what you're building in the ISO 27001 is an ISMS, an information security management system. So you're building a system, and the system not in a technical sense of an application, but a system like a set of processes and controls. And as long as your system has controls in place or processes in place to catch any failures in the control, you're going to pass your ISO. And to me, that's more important than so as long as so my key example I've been going back to of like some code got pushed to production without getting a proper review or approval. As long as you have a process in place to catch that and correct that, you will still get a clean ISO report. And to me, that's like kind of a better way to look at it, because there's always going to be situations where a control breaks down or fails, and that way, you need to be catching it and observing and evolving your organization, and that's more important. That evolution is more important to me than the strict like pass or fail of a control. But that's what ISO is all about. And I have in my compliance deeper dive in a few weeks, we will go into some of those. Is that a hand up? Oh, that's just a thumbs up. Thanks for the thumbs up. Anybody else have a question or three?
Yeah, I have a question. So when you talked about the testing, the security controls, can you explain a little bit more in depth, like the process of that? Like how would a group within an organization do any type of testing? Can you break that down?
Yeah. So you mean internal testing before the auditors come, or just how the auditors would test?
Yeah, no,
Or-
internally.
Yeah, internally, that's a good key thing. It's funny that you say that because SOX requires you as a company to internally assess your controls, and then the external auditor has to assess your assessment and do their own assessment. But like internally, you know, similar to an external auditor, you say, I'm tired of the same example. Another example would be your configurations of your AWS instance. Let's talk about that. You have you know, you should have the SOX tests, the audit, and the control you put in place. You'll have to write it down, and you have to write, you know, in your listing of controls how you think those configurations should be set. So you're going to say no S3 bucket should ever be not encrypted. It should always be encrypted. So that's a simple configuration. You can pull some reports from AWS and from the AWS resources to determine whether or not S3 buckets ever got spun up to be unencrypted. What really should happen is you should have some monitoring in place so that if anybody tried to spin up an S3 bucket to be not encrypted, it would just not get spun up. It would just error out. But nonetheless, you have those controls in place. So the testing procedure is, you know, looking at making sure you have the right AWS inventory of accounts that are production facing and that, you know, you need to test, and that comes with some level of diligence by the auditor to determine and know which accounts to look at, and then get direct reports from AWS to show proof and evidence that all S3 buckets, you know, are in fact encrypted, or that there's a configuration that's set standard right. So I mean, to summarize, like you write your controls. There's a control objective in each framework. I guess I should back up more. Yeah, each framework, SOC 2, has a control objective, many control objectives. They'll have a control objective around software development lifecycle. They have a control objective around passwords and accounts and logging. And at each control, you have to write out all these controls. Ooh, look at this. Some examples are coming up. I was thinking about pulling up the actual examples too, but you did it for me. Yeah, these are control objectives. You got to write a control that shows how you and your organization are meeting that control. So you might do that if you're doing a spreadsheet, take that very first one. Roles and policies. SSO. Oh, SSO.
I'll give them an example of an
Yeah.
easy one. You just finish your thought process and then I'll go into this.
Okay. Yeah. So in that very first one, access control, and you want all production in scope things to be going through the SSO, and that way you can force MFA, multi-factor authentication, on at the SSO level. So that means you could say everything in scope is going through MFA, and MFA is turned on. You would write that control as I stated in like a column next to this, and the auditor comes in, reads that control, says, okay, this is your control, and they'll want to look at all those in scope systems to make sure they are in fact tied to SSO. In some cases, they may actually want to see you log in. They might want to see you log in without going through the SSO to see if it can be done. And then, you know, they test it that way. Usually those auditors at the SOC 2 level are not pen testers. They won't like try to network crash and go in through a back door. They are generally, you know, just going to test, you know, the general ways. But that's kind of how I would say they test it. The key elements are identify the population and identify the things in scope for that audit test. Grab the population, usually grab a sample, and then test that sample. And if it's something like a sign-on, they're not gonna sample it. They're gonna test every single one. But go
And
ahead,
put it
Danielle. Did you?
in